The first thing I'm going to go over is how the tier list works. So first of all, we have meta operators that are really good for the current meta that we're in because of the utility that they bring and the utility they are able to counter. So people that go in situational are not necessarily worse than operators that are in good or operators that are in meta. They're just only really meta or really good in certain situations. Then you have operators in okay. These operators are worse than the people in good and meta, but they're not like bad. You can still bring them. You're just able to bring other people that you probably should be bringing. Then it's bad. These operators are just not good. The utility and their playstyle just doesn't fit with the meta at all. And if you play them, you're probably going to be more of a hindrance to your team than you are a help. With that out of the way, timestamps are below if you want to go to the operator that you want to know about. Let's get into the tier list. First of all, I'm going to give you an example of each tier just so you can kind of see where I'm going. If we're going with a bad operator, let's go with Cav. She might be the only person in this tier now that I'm looking at all the other operators, to be completely honest, but I don't think she's a good operator. She might be good for this meta because people aren't droning and you can get some cool flanks off, but the only reason that she's good, like I just stated, is if you're relying on the people that you're going up against to be bad. I think operators that rely on the enemies to not be good are inherently bad operators. Every operator does get good the worse your enemies get, but Cav's entire playstyle revolves around the fact that your enemies have to be bad for you to get value out of them, because if they weren't bad, they'd roam clear you, they'd drone you out, they'd have flank cams for you, they'd have a nomad or claymores for you, so you wouldn't be able to do anything with Cav correctly. If you wanted to play a roamer that actually held its ground, which is what roamers are meant to do because they're meant to waste time, you would play literally anybody else, and that is why I think Cav is bad. An operator I think is okay is Thunderbird, and I am on PC. I just want to get this out of the way right now. If I'm on console, I would probably put her in good, but I'm on PC and healing is less effective due to the fact that people hit heads more on PC, so I'm going to put her in okay for now. She did get nerfed. They took away her nitro cell, they took away her impacts, and they made her do less healing per shot. Although they did increase its rate of fire, it doesn't really matter because overall it's a pretty heavy nerf. Next is the situational category, and Mira is my prime example of what a situational operator is. Mira is great. She's always going to be meta. She's just, always going to be good, but she's only going to be good and or meta in certain situations on certain maps. Let's take Coastline for example. On the kitchen bomb site, Mira is really, really good. But on the hookah bomb site, she's terrible because there's not a single place that you can put her Mira windows that can't get shot from outside, meaning that she is really good, but only in certain situations, bringing her down to the situational category. Does that mean that she's worse than anybody above her? No. If I had my way, this tier would be in its own tier list over here, but I can't do that, so this is kind of just what you get. For a good operator, I'm going to put Smoke in the good category. Now, the reason I'm putting him in the good category, I don't know if you've checked the patch notes, but he lost his deployable shield, which is a very, very huge part of his kit because the SMG-11 shotgun combo is a very limiting loadout to have because of the amount of range that it has. Having a deployable shield can completely negate this because you can take safer gunfights behind this deployable shield. You can also throw your smoke grenades behind a deployable shield, making it safer to use his utility than if you didn't have a deployable shield that you were sitting in front of. If someone else brings a deployable shield for you to sit behind, then cool. He's still the same operator he was, and you can move him up a tier. But this tier list is meant for solo queue ranked, and if you don't have teammates that you can play their shield, then he's not really that good. So I think he's still a good operator, but he just doesn't have the bang that he really used to have. Now going over an operator that I think is meta is Mozzie. Now we're in a very TDM heavy kind of meta where everyone's just like running and gunning like it's Call of Duty, and Mozzie does this very well. Not only does he have 2 good weapons and a 1.5 times scope to be able to do this really well, but his utility helps him out even further because he can stop himself from getting drones, meaning that he can kill people when they don't have intel, which is a lot easier to do than if they have drones on you. So he's really good in the meta. Another operator that is just like Mozzie and is meta for the same reason is Mute. He can deny drones, he can deny walls, and he can roam effectively because of this. Mute jammers also counter Dokkaebi calls and lion scans, which are 2 extremely meta operators that would normally be able to clear you out. So he's good at roaming, he's good at helping teammates roam, and he's good at anchoring. He also has a shotgun for sight setup with an SMG-11 and a nitro cell. So overall, his total utility and what he's able to counter is massive, and that's why he's meta. Echo is next, and I think Echo is good. Now normally I would place him lower on a tier list, but I think because of the fact that they took away 2 deployable shields from defense, Smoke and Alibi being the 2 that I'm talking about, he really is more valuable because he brings a deployable shield. Also, he has a 1.5 times scope, and he has 2 cameras that you can hide and a number of locations if you're actually smart as an Echo player. So I think he's actually pretty good, especially if you can communicate well with him, like you stun an enemy and you tell the person next to you like, hey, I just stunned this guy, go swing and kill him. He's really good. So Echo, the better you get as him, the better he's going to be because he has such a high skill ceiling, which is why I think he is a good operator, especially for this meta. Next, I'm going to talk about Wamai and Jager, and I'm just going to get this out of the way because there's a lot of controversy controversy with what I'm about to say, but I think Jager is good. Jager is a good operator. He counters grenades, he counters other projectiles, but in a meta where there's not a lot of these projectiles due to people just playing Warden, you don't really have to worry about this as much as you did when he was super meta. Also, they nerfed his gun a lot and it took away his barbed wire, which is a pretty big piece of his kit, so I think he's just good for now. Next is Wamai, and Wamai I'm actually going to put in meta. This is the controversy I was talking about. A lot of people think that Jager is better than Wamai, and in a solo queue environment, sure, I guess you could say that, but I think Wamai brings a lot more to the table than Jager does. Not even talking about the fact that his utility counters more. First of all, he has a 1.5 times scope and it's on an MP5. The MP5 has little to no recoil and a lot of ammo, so if you have an extended barrel on it, the lackluster damage can be made up for pretty easily. He also has a Keratos if you want to make head holes or feet holes for sight setup, and if you anchor as him and play him correctly, he can actually counter more grenades than Jager can. So I think he's definitely meta, whereas Jager is just good. Next is Oryx, and I think Oryx is okay. Now on my last tier list, I put him in meta, but I'm putting him in okay for now. The reason for this being is because he lost his 1.5 times scope. Now, why is just losing a scope completely changing where he is on the tier list? Well, the reason for that being is because the only reason people played Oryx was because he had a 1.5 times scope on a really good SMG. Now, he still has that really good SMG, but without the 1.5 times scope, it doesn't pack as much of a punch. You can have a really good SMG and a 1.5 times scope on many other operators, so the reason that people played Oryx is completely gone now. Also, in terms of actual utility, he doesn't bring much, so if you're going to play anybody to roam effectively with a good weapon with a 1.5 times scope, he's no longer your guy, making it to where the only reason people played him is gone, meaning he's not really a good operator. Azami, I think, is meta. Azami has always been meta, and she always will be unless she is changed, because the nature of her gadget allows her to be flexible and good in any meta that she decides to be in. Now she's even more powerful because 2 deployable shields just got taken away on defense, so she's going to be played even more. She essentially brings 5 deployable shields that you can place anywhere and make lineups for, and it's a ranged gadget, meaning there's even more versatility there. She also has barbed wire, and she has a pretty good SMG, making her overall a really good solo queue operator. Pulse is next, and I think Pulse is situational. I mean, I guess you could play him for every single map, every single site. He's just not going to be effective if you do, which is essentially what a situational operator is. He can really only be played if you are below the site or if there is room above the site that you're playing inside of. But even then, some sites you're not able to nitro cell or shoot through, so his information is pretty useless when you can bring someone like Valkyrie who brings even more information and a better weapon. Castle is also situational. Castle can be played every single site, sure, but he's not going to be as effective as other sites like sites on Bank or Border. These are his best maps because you're able to extend the site horizontally due to the fact that everybody plays vertical on those maps. He's overall a very advanced operator, and the better you are and the higher up in the ranks you are, the better he's going to be, but only on certain maps because you can't really play him everywhere and him be that effective. Next is Thorn, and I think Thorn's good. I probably would have put her in okay if not for her deployable shield, but her weapon's pretty good. It's a 50 cal. She has 3 traps and she has a deployable shield, so, you know, she's good, but not really even comparable to the people that I'm putting in the good category, so I'm gonna put her at the very bottom of good. Same thing for Ella. Ella is just a better version of Thorn in my opinion. Ella has 3 stuns, she has pretty good weapons, and she has a deployable shield, so I think overall she's just pretty good, especially in solo queue environments. Frost, I think, is meta. Now, Frost is really good in solo queue environments, not because of her traps. Her traps are not really that good at all, so a lot of people, when they see Frost super high in a tier list, they don't really understand why she's there, but it's everything else about her kit that puts her there. First of all, really easy to control SMG with a lot of ammo and a 1.5 times scope. That's just 1 point. Second of all, deployable shield. That's 2 points. Third of all, she has a secondary shotgun for sight setup and roaming presence that you might want. Fourth of all, she has information with her traps. If people are shooting your traps because they're not idiots and they're not falling into them, then that's information. You can swing off of that information, just like you can swing off of the information of someone getting caught in your traps. It's the exact same idea. If you're creative with Frost, however, you actually will catch the occasional person in your Frost mats, making her even better than stated with just all of her other utility. So even if her primary utility is bad for solo queue, she's still really good because of everything else that she brings in her loadout. Alibi is okay. If she had a deployable shield, I'd put her in good, but she doesn't anymore. She also lost her 1.5, meaning the really only good thing that she brings in her kit is her SMG with the 1-time scope. That's it. Her ability, not that good. She has a bailiff, so does Doc, right? Like, so if you're playing her for really anything, you can do that same thing with better operators on this list. So I don't think she's that good anymore. I think she's just okay. Maestro I also think is good. In my last tier list, I actually put Maestro super low. The reason being is everyone's playing Brava because of her AR and how good her gadget is, but also there aren't observation blockers in Y8 Season 1. Now there are, and a lot of people bring him, including Maestro, meaning he's a lot more viable, and it's a lot easier to hide his cameras from people like Brava, Flores, or Twitch. So you can actually play him on certain bomb sites, or really any bomb site for that matter, and him still be semi-useful. He also has a pretty good LMG and a bailiff for site setup, if that wasn't enough for you. Next is Rook, and I think he's good. It's really just because of the fact that he has a 2 2x scope. I think anybody with a 2x scope on defense is absolutely insane because you can just sit in sight and hold really, really long angles, or you can spawn peek. The fact that he also has self-revive is pretty cool, and he brings up extra health, but that's not really the reason that anybody plays him. He also has those proximity alarms for information, so I don't think he's actually that bad compared to somebody like Thunderbird, whose healing is like pretty dog ass. Next is Doc, and Doc I'll put in the bottom of good with Rook, pretty much for the exact same reason. I mean, the 1.5 times scope super good, the MP5 is easy to control. He also has a bailiff for sight setup, so I'd honestly put him above Rook, and he has other secondary utility that's also pretty good. Not to mention he is the best healing operator in the entire game because he does heal everyone to full now, which is super, super cool, especially in a solo queue environment with the fact that you can overstim yourself for gunfights. I think overall he's definitely the best healer, and if you play him every single round, you're probably gonna get some value just because of the scopes, just like Rook. Now, are either of these two operators really good with utility? Absolutely not. If we were talking about utility, I'd switch those two with Alibi any day, but we have to be realistic here. Utility isn't everything in the game anymore. We're not in a utility meta, so you're not going to see the same tier list in year 8 that you would see in a year like year 5, right? So the meta is changing. It's really weird. You look at any other operator tier list, it's going to be the exact same thing. Really weird, unorthodox, but it is just how it is. Melusi is next, and I think she's meta. She's good at slowing down the attacker rush, and in most lobbies, attackers are rushing, and they're going in the building really, really fast, so she completely counters this. She's also a 3 armor, which means she can play off of her Melusi Banshees with a bit more health, which is super useful because normally your Banshees are going to be close to sight anyways, and if you're playing on sight, that means you're an anchor, and if you're an anchor, then the extra armor is a lot more useful than the extra speed. So in my opinion, Melusi is as good as she's ever been. Vigil, I think, is good. The ability to make it to where people can't drone you is super powerful right now in this meta. He's honestly, in my opinion, just a worse version of Mozzie, but you can play him on a bit bigger maps like Bank, where you can't really pinpoint where the drones are going to be. So I think overall he's pretty good. He definitely has his place, and the good category is where it is. Flash, I think, is situational. You can bring her out in certain situations like top floor Oregon or coastline and hookah, but like that's pretty much it. Like you can't really bring her on every site, especially maps like theme park or Bank, where there's a lot of open space that you can get flanked from. But there are maps like Oregon or Border, where it's really closed in, and you can hold ground for a lot longer with Clash and make it a lot more meaningful than on longer ranged maps. So she is good, but only in certain situations. Solis, I think, is meta. Solis is really good, especially on close range maps, because you're able to tell where the attackers are going to be pushing from a lot easier. You're also able to roam really effectively, and being able to see and counter most attacker utility is one of the most overpowered abilities that they've added to this game in a long time. So I definitely think that she is very good for this meta as of right now. By the way, I haven't really been like ordering this correctly, but I'll do that like at the end of the video as I'm talking and doing the outro, so just to let y'all know. Next is Bandit, and I think Bandit's meta. Unless they have an ace and they're countering your trick, you can completely counter EMP grenades, which is like the entire attacker meta. So the ability to counter a meta is what makes an operator meta. Therefore, by definition, Bandit is meta. Next is Warden, and I think Warden is meta, not because of his utility. People really aren't like smoke planting or flash planting anymore, but the fact that he has a deployable shield, a 1.5 times scope on a really good SMG, and or a nitro cell completely sells it. So I think like just for the fact that he does that in this fragger meta, I think he's really, really good. Next is Cade, and I think Cade is good. Cade can be played on numerous maps, but he gets countered very easily. The only reason you would ever play Cade is if Thatcher's banned. If Thatcher's on the board, you cannot play Cade. Now, if they have EMP grenades, it makes it even harder because then you have to Cade trick, or impact trick for that matter. So Cade is really only good in certain situations whenever you don't have certain people banned. But even if you do bring him whenever there's a Thatcher, you're still making them waste an EMP and making them not able to open a wall. So I think he's still good. I just don't think he's super meta like Bandit is right now. Next is Valkyrie, and like, let's be honest, Valkyrie is always going to be meta. Unless they make it to where her cameras are easier to see, or you're like not able to throw them, or like something. They have to make her cameras like less hideable. Unless they do that, she's always going to be meta. So, I mean, nothing really changed with her. MPX, Nitro Cell, 3 hidden cameras, really good on long range maps. Always going to be super, super meta, and that's why people ban her a lot still, and they have yet to do anything about it. Next is Melusi. Now, Melusi, I'm going to put in good. A lot of people would love me to like put her in meta, but I want to put her in good, and maybe at the top of good with smoke. The reason for this being is the fact that Fenrir is in the game now. She is just a better version of Melusi, in my opinion, just like Ella is a better version of Thorn. Does that make Thorn suddenly a terrible operator? Not really. It just makes her kind of outshadowed by somebody like Ella, which is why Melusi is a bit outshadowed by somebody like Fenrir. Tachanka is also good. I think he is good for the same reason that Rook is good, except he also brings a deployable shield, putting him a bit higher than Rook and Doc could be. He also has pretty good utility if you know how to use it correctly with a 2x scope, making him the ultimate defender package if you want to anchor instead of roam. Next is Kapkan, and Kapkan's always going to be good. It doesn't really matter if they take away his 1.5 times scope because his kill potential is still insane. Not even talking about his main ability, he also has a nitro cell, so I think Kapkan is always going to be really good. Lesion, I think, is meta. There's a reason that I think Lesion is meta, because he's really good at, one, information, which is super important in a fragger meta when everyone's running at you, and two, he's good at slowing down that fragger meta that I just previously mentioned. People can't sprint when they're in a Lesion mine, they have to pull it out, it makes a lot of noise, and being able to swing off of that information with a T5 SMG is super cool, so I think he's just gotta be meta. Aruni, I think, is good. I don't think she's necessarily meta, because, like, you can just play other people and do what she does, like Wamai, because he has a 1.5. There's just not enough grenades and utility that Aruni counters in this current meta for her to be considered meta, in my opinion. I think she's an outstanding operator and is probably going to go like second to Smoke at the top of good, but she's not meta in my eyes. And then finally, the last defender we have on my list and what you've all been waiting for is Fenrir. Now, Fenrir, in my opinion, is actually meta. Now, I want to put him either meta or in good. I'm not going to put him in any other tier. I don't think he's situational because you can play him on every site, and I really don't think he's okay or bad. Like, he's actually a pretty solid operator, but I'm making this tier list very early on in the season, so it's going to be very hard to tell whether he's going to be super meta or whether he's just going to be kind of good. Now, I think that people are going to start playing him a lot more than Smoke and a lot more than Melusi. I think the entire reason actually that they took away Smoke's deployable shield and they nerfed him is because he's so alike to Smoke that they wanted people to start playing Fenrir, so they nerfed Smoke so people would play him more. That's kind of just my personal opinion, but that being said, I do think Fenrir is pretty good, and I think he can be used in every site. I think he's good at slowing down that attacker rush and punishing people who don't drone and punishing people who walk into rooms like most people. So in terms of like how he deals with the meta, I think he's really good for this meta, and so by definition, I think he's a meta operator. Oh, also, before I forgot Goyo. Sorry, Goyo I think is good. 1.5 times scope on a vector, super cool. He also has 4 canisters that have the longest duration and the biggest pile of fire out of all the entry denial operators, but he's a bit hard to use in solo queue environments because you don't know if you're going to get the most value out of his fire because you don't know if they're all going to get used, and he's easily countered by Twitch or grenades. So that's why I think he's good, and that's pretty much it for the entire tier list. If you disagree with anything I had to say, let me know down below. Like the video if you liked it, sub the channel down below as I am releasing more tier lists throughout the week. With that out of the way, my name is Alka, and I'll see you on the next video. Later.